On this Sunday's Face the Nation, CBS News elections director Anthony Salvanto unveiled a new Battleground tracker poll along with CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Among other things, it shows that Democrats are very motivated to vote against the president and consider their vote this year to be as important as in a presidential election year.
Can Democrats recapture the House? Will California have a big impact on their plans? Or will the blue wave hit the rocks on the West Coast? Plus, we'll take a closer look at women voters. It's time now for the Battleground Briefing. I'm Ed O'Keefe, CBS News political correspondent, here with CBS News Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto. Anthony, I know you've been busy the last few days crunching a big data set of new information on what we may or may not see transpire in November, the Battleground Tracker. Your big takeaway from what you've discovered?
This is close. We're going to be doing this all year, watching this. And I think, speaking of waves, I mean, this thing could ebb and flow as we go along, because what it turns out is that right now, if the election were held, the Democrats would gain enough seats to just make the majority. And I mean, 219 of the 218 that they would need to take it. That's our current estimate. So you put a margin of error around that, and we've got what is effectively a toss-up race for House control. And, you know, there's a couple of reasons for that. What we did here was we concentrated our polling in the battleground districts, right? Everybody knows you get 435 seats up, but only a relative few of them are really going to make a difference. So that's where we went. We did the polling. We ran the model. We incorporated a bunch of different House factors. And you look at that demographically, these districts are really interesting because they're not all full of Trump voters. They're not part of that Trump white working class base, but neither are they part of the Democratic base. Right. So there's a lot of swing in here, and we see that in the polling where people are kind of conflicted because they've got a good economy. But then again, they also, more of them sort of personally think the president hasn't handled himself personally well. A lot of them have leaned Republican before. They like the policies. So we're going to watch a lot of back and forth just based on that.
One of the things to keep in mind about this survey as it continues till November is that you're looking more at how many seats could go red or blue. You're not necessarily going to go district by district and give us a horse race number each time, right?
Well, right. See, because what happens in a lot of polling is that you see national numbers, and that's nice, and you get a national percentage, except that this is not a national election. It is 435 separate elections in these districts. And when politicians go back and they say all politics is local, that's part of the reason why. So we want to focus down on there, and then we want to model, which is a fancy word for saying take into account a bunch of factors. Put that together and give folks an estimate of the seats. Because, look, when they watch us out on election night in November, we're going to be counting seats. So why not start doing it now?
Sure, exactly. And, of course, Tuesday is a big test for both parties out in California, where we have what are called jungle primaries. We should remind people what exactly a jungle primary is. They do it a little differently out there, where everyone's on the same ballot, and you basically vote for whoever you want, and the top two finishers, whether they're Republican or Democrat, appear on the ballot in November, which has set off this really interesting jiu-jitsu race in like up to 10 different districts across California, most of them in Southern California, where you have a Republican incumbent or a retiring Republican, and you have Democrats trying to make sure that they're at least number two on that ballot, if not totally box out the Republicans entirely. They believe that because Hillary Clinton won these districts in 2016, that they may have a shot here at potentially winning them. But what is interesting here is they have so many candidates running in some of these districts. Look at that 39th District of California. That's Ed Royce, retiring chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. 17 Democrats registered to run in this district. And it got so bad, the chairman of the House, or the California Democratic Party, had to call a truce and say, everybody stop fighting, just run ads about why you should be the guy, and run ads against the Republicans, because if we keep doing this, we're going to get boxed out, and there may end up being two Republicans by sheer reality of mathematics, that if you have 17 Democrats and a few Republicans, things may get so splintered among those Democrats that the Republicans end up on the ballot. This is happening in a few different places, though, right? Yeah,
and, you know, the reason people around the country who are watching this might really be interested, not just, oh, those, you know, zany Californians who've changed their election system. You know, what happened is Californians tried to put in place a system that would moderate the parties. And this was part of the Schwarzenegger era with the, you know, reforms at the time. So they opened up the primary and they figured, well, what'll happen is that all these Democrats and all these Republicans will have to come towards the middle in order to try to get the nominations. But like you said, is there such a thing as too much of a good thing? All of a sudden, all of these candidates have come in. We still remember that primary voters are still more ideological than everybody else in their respective parties. And like you mentioned, now you've got a bunch of folks competing to try and might splinter that vote. Now, let me tell you, looking forward nationally, the Democrats can't win control of the House in California on Tuesday, but they could lose it. So if they don't get one of their candidates, one of their Democrats, into the finals, which would be the top two candidates that finish and go on in November, then all those districts come off the board.
Right.
And we'll be back here in a month talking about a much smaller chance for the Democrats to retake the House because they won't have these pickup opportunities.
Because the conservative estimate is that at least 4, as many as 10 Republican-held seats in the state could flip to the Democrats.
Yeah.
Your numbers put that somewhere in the middle, I think, right? It's like there's 7 that we should be focused on?
Yeah, but overall, they tell a really interesting story, and it's one that pertains to California, but also will play out in other suburbs throughout the country. You've got changing areas. These are Southern California is a place where, yes, you've had a larger amount of the Hispanic vote, but you've also had an influx of new folks moving in. You've had changing demographics getting younger as well, and younger voters are more inclined to vote for Democrats. You know, you're talking about Orange County, California, the place that, for a generation, anybody old enough to remember, that was the hotbed of Republicanism, which has now changed and has now gone, is basically a 50-50 county marginally, even for Clinton last time. That's part of the change here, and that's if you're in the Democratic national committee, you're looking at that and saying, okay, that's a place where we can go to try to pick up seats. That'll be a test.
Do you know how badly the Democrats want to win in California? They opened a West Coast office in Irvine, which is like the population center of Orange County. I was out there last summer meeting with the folks running the office for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the folks that elect Democrats to the House. I'm sitting there, I look over my shoulder, and in the office there in the front sits one of the real housewives of Orange County. She runs an insurance office from the same office building as they do. And that's where they are. They're right there in the middle of Orange County. They did this because they believe if you could set up an operation there, you're within driving distance of like 5 of the 10 districts that they think they can win. And they're relying on Latinos, Asians, as you said, women, younger voters, and this general disgust among them with the president. So
and don't forget taxes, because California, and this is somewhat the same in New Jersey and some places in New York, is one of those blue states where a lot of people feel that they're going to be negatively impacted by the Republican tax cut. Now, a lot of these places have sent Republicans to the House over the years on economic matters. But if you've got a very large mortgage, because housing values are really high out there,
right,
and if you're paying high taxes because those are high tax states, and you can't deduct those anymore, what a lot of folks are telling us is, well, wait a second, we're not sure if this is really a tax cut for us.
Right.
So even in the polling where we see people saying, we're not sure what the impact, at best not sure what the impact of this is going to be, that's part where we're going to watch the argument, where Republicans will come in and say, hey, we cut your taxes, and some of these suburbanites are going to go, oh, wait a second, did you really?
Right.
We'll see if they can make that argument.
It is one of the cruel ironies of it for Republicans is that, was it 42% in the survey said they haven't felt, or they're not sure yet whether there's been a real effect.
And the other thing, too, if I could add, is that if you look at that by income, too, folks lower down the income line are even less likely to say that they felt the impact. So when you think about that part of the base that Republicans lured over during 2016, even that seems like it might be a little more marginal now.
So let's step back and look at the 49 other states in California. What do Republicans generally have to do in order to hold on to control this November? You know,
one thing could be close the gender gap that we see. One of the things that popped out in this poll was the big difference between how men and women are voting in these congressional districts. Women by wide double-digit margins saying that they favor the Democrats. For a lot of them, they also say that they feel like the president right now doesn't respect people like them. That's something that I think Democrats are going to try to take advantage of. That dovetails with the idea of going after new voters, people who don't typically vote in the midterms. They're going to have to try to change that calculus. And that's something I think if the Republicans want to try to close that gap. Now, it's offset a bit, because we see men marginally saying that they would vote Republican. But these are some of the largest gaps that we have seen. It's a little bit apples to oranges because we're looking at competitive districts as opposed to nationwide. But if that gap doesn't close, then that's part of the reason Republicans could be in real
It's
trouble.
almost as if the parties are realigning now along gender as opposed to race, ethnicity, and geography.
Yeah, gender and education.
Yeah.
Because then you look at that by women who hold college degrees, and there's an even larger gender gap, at least in this. And, you know, we're old enough to remember 2016, where the Democrats were going to win over all these voters, and they didn't do nearly as well as they wanted to. So it's clear that this is still a group that could swing. It's clear that they could still hear Republican messages, if not on the economy or on immigration. But at least at this point, they're sort of back in play.
It's fascinating, the popularity and the eagerness for women to be winning in these seats among Democrats. If you look at, there was a fact, our buddy Dave Wasserman, who tracks this stuff as well, another forecaster, pointed out that there had been 65 Democratic House primaries with at least one woman and one man running, no incumbent on the ballot. Women had won 45 of them, men had just won 18 of them. Yeah. Shows you that there's this real hunger to put women on the ballot this year.
Especially for Democrats.
Yeah.
You know, we asked in the poll, does it matter to you if you want to vote for a woman or a man if you had a choice? And most people said it didn't matter. But for the votes who did say it mattered, they were more likely to be Democrats. And Democrats said they wanted to vote for a woman over a male candidate. And if they did, the reason was that they felt like women were going to be more in touch with the issues and understand the issues that they cared about. So at least on the Democratic side, especially if you start watching these primaries where there are, like you said, so many, a record number of women running, that could be a real advantage. And it seems to be a particular draw for Democrats.
And on the Republican side, what was it, 8 in 10 Republican primary voters say they want to see their candidates hew to the president, right? Yeah. And not put distance between them, which just reinforces the idea that this really has become the president's party.
Yeah. I mean, you know, you're up on the Hill and you're talking to these folks, and they're running somewhere, and do they have to be in line with the president? Their Republican voters say that they do. And, you know, they say they want a Republican House candidate who's in line with the president. The trouble for them, of course, is that for independents, and of course for any Democrats they want to lower over, that answer is no. They want, even the ones who want a Republican say that they'd like a Republican who's more independent from Trump. And that comes back to this narrative of how much does the Congress, even the Republican Congress, push back against the administration, whether it's on trade policy or anything else, where they might set up that back and forth, you know, and they've got that line to walk, turn out the base, walking lockstep with the president, but that doesn't necessarily win them any more votes beyond it.
You can recap all of these Battleground Tracker findings at cbsnews.com. Next time you're doing this is when? How often are we going to see these numbers?
As often as I can.
As often as the bosses want them. There you go. And we'll be doing this through November. So thank you for joining us. For Anthony Salvanto, I'm Ed O'Keefe. Take care.